My greedy brother-in-law tried to steal my grandfather's watch. He had no idea he'd just triggered a trap that would ruin him forever. The doorbell rang at exactly 7:30 p.m., and I knew my peaceful evening was about to end. Through the window, I could see Marcus adjusting his designer jacket, that smug smile already plastered across his face before I even opened the door. My sister-in-law's husband had this way of walking into our house like he owned the place, but tonight something felt different. Tonight, he kept glancing at my wrist with an intensity that made my skin crawl. What happened next would expose the kind of person Marcus really was, and by the end of the evening, he'd learn a lesson about greed that would change everything between our families forever. But before we continue, please subscribe to the channel and let us know where you're listening in the comments. I should probably start from the beginning, because understanding Marcus requires understanding how he wormed his way into our family in the first place. 3 years ago, my wife Jennifer's younger sister Sarah brought home this charming guy who claimed to work in finance. Marcus had all the right answers, wore expensive suits, and talked a big game about his investment portfolio. He swept Sarah off her feet with fancy dinners and weekend trips to places she'd only dreamed about visiting. The red flags were there from day one, but Sarah was so smitten that she ignored every warning sign. Like how Marcus would always forget his wallet when the check came at restaurants, leaving Sarah to pay. Or how his stories about his high-powered job never quite added up when you pressed him for details. Jennifer tried talking to her sister, but love makes people blind to the obvious. Within 6 months, Marcus had convinced Sarah to let him move into her apartment. Within a year, he'd talked her into taking out a loan to help fund his mysterious business ventures. By the time they got married last spring, Marcus had basically turned my sister-in-law into his personal ATM, though she was too proud to admit it to the family. The thing about guys like Marcus is they're always scheming, always looking for the next opportunity to take advantage of someone's generosity. He had this way of studying people, cataloging their possessions, figuring out what he could potentially get his hands on. I'd noticed him doing it at family gatherings, his eyes lingering on expensive items like he was mentally calculating their resale value. But the Rolex, that was different. The Rolex represented something Marcus couldn't understand, something money couldn't buy. It was a 1970 Submariner that belonged to my grandfather, passed down to my father, and then to me when he died 5 years ago. The watch wasn't just valuable because of its price tag, though it was worth about $40,000. It was valuable because it represented 3 generations of hard work, integrity, and family pride. My grandfather had bought that watch with his first paycheck after returning from World War II. He'd saved for months, working double shifts at the steel mill, because he wanted something that would last forever, something he could pass down to his son, who would pass it down to his son. It wasn't about showing off wealth, it was about honoring the sacrifices that came before us. Every time I looked at that watch, I remembered my grandfather's calloused hands teaching me how to tie fishing knots. I remembered my father wearing it to my high school graduation, his chest swelling with pride as I walked across the stage. The scratches on the metal told stories of decades of honest work, family celebrations, and quiet moments between fathers and sons. Marcus knew none of this history, of course. To him, it was just an expensive watch that some old guy wore to family barbecues. But I'd caught him staring at it during Sarah's birthday party last month, and something about his expression made me uncomfortable. It wasn't admiration or curiosity, it was hunger. That's what made tonight different. Usually Marcus would show up to our house with Sarah, both of them staying for dinner and leaving by 9 o'clock. But tonight, Sarah had called earlier to say she was stuck at work, finishing up a big project for her marketing firm. Marcus would come alone, she said, just to drop off some photos from their recent vacation that Jennifer had requested. Simple enough, right? Except Marcus had been at our house for 20 minutes now, and he still hadn't mentioned any photos. Instead, he was nursing a beer and making small talk about the economy, his eyes constantly drifting to my wrist where the Submariner caught the light from our living room lamp. Jennifer was in the kitchen preparing snacks, completely oblivious to the tension building in our living room. She adored her sister and wanted desperately to like Marcus, so she'd trained herself not to see the obvious signs of his manipulative nature. But I'd been watching this guy for 3 years now, and I knew predatory behavior when I saw it. The conversation took a strange turn when Marcus started asking pointed questions about my work schedule. When did I usually leave for the office? Did Jennifer work from home on certain days? How often did we go out of town? He framed these questions casually, like he was just making conversation, but there was an underlying purpose that made my nerves tingle with warning. Then he made his move, and it was so smooth I almost missed it. He complimented the watch, asking about its history and value. When I explained it was a family heirloom, his eyes lit up with fake interest. He asked if he could examine it more closely, praising the craftsmanship and talking about his own appreciation for vintage timepieces. Like an idiot, I took off the watch and handed it to him. The moment it left my wrist, I felt naked, vulnerable in a way I hadn't expected. Marcus held it with the reverence of someone handling a religious artifact, turning it over in his hands, studying every detail with an intensity that should have been my final warning. But what happened next caught me completely off guard. Marcus slipped the watch onto his own wrist, claiming he wanted to see how it looked on him. The sight of my grandfather's submariner on this parasite's arm made my blood pressure spike, but I forced myself to stay calm. Surely he was just curious, surely he'd hand it back in a moment. Instead, Marcus stood up and walked toward the kitchen where Jennifer was arranging cheese and crackers on a serving tray. He struck up a conversation with her, gesturing animatedly with his hands, the watch glinting on his wrist like it belonged there. Minutes ticked by, and he made no move to return my family heirloom. My patience was running thin when Marcus announced he needed to use the bathroom. He disappeared down the hall, still wearing my watch, and something deep in my gut told me this wasn't innocent curiosity anymore. I waited 30 seconds, then followed him, my footsteps silent on the hardwood floor. The bathroom door was closed, but I could hear movement inside. Not the usual sounds you'd expect, but careful, deliberate movements like someone trying not to make noise. I pressed my ear to the door and heard what sounded like Marcus talking quietly on his phone, though I couldn't make out the words. When he emerged 5 minutes later, the watch was gone from his wrist. He'd rolled down his sleeves to cover his arms, and his demeanor had shifted from casual visitor to someone eager to leave. He made excuses about Sarah expecting him home, thanked Jennifer for the hospitality, and headed toward the front door. That's when I made my decision. The decision that would expose Marcus for exactly what he was and teach him a lesson about stealing from the wrong family. But I wasn't going to confront him directly, wasn't going to give him the chance to lie his way out of this situation or manipulate Sarah into taking his side. No, I had something much better in mind. Something that would not only get my grandfather's watch back, but would reveal Marcus's true character to everyone who mattered. You see, I'd learned a few things about preparation and strategic thinking during my years in corporate security, and Marcus had just picked the wrong mark for his little theft operation. As he reached for the door handle, already calculating how much $40,000 would improve his financial situation, Marcus had no idea that his life was about to become very, very complicated. He thought he'd just scored the biggest payday of his pathetic career, but he'd actually walked into a trap that would expose him as the fraud he'd always been. The next 24 hours would reveal exactly what kind of man my sister-in-law had married, and the consequences would ripple through our family in ways none of us could have predicted. Marcus thought he was clever, thought he'd outsmarted some naive old guy who trusted too easily. He was about to discover just how wrong he was. The front door clicked shut behind Marcus, and I waited exactly 30 seconds before putting my plan into motion. You see, while Marcus thought he was playing checkers, I'd been playing chess for the past 3 years, gathering intelligence on his schemes and preparing for exactly this kind of situation. The first call I made was to my old colleague Jake Martinez, who now ran a private investigation firm specializing in insurance fraud. Jake owed me a favor from our corporate security days, and tonight I was calling it in. "Tom, what's got you calling this late?" Jake's voice carried that familiar mix of curiosity and professionalism that had made him so effective at catching white-collar criminals. "I need a surveillance setup, and I need it tonight. Full audio and video monitoring of a target who just stole a $40,000 watch from my house." There was a pause, then Jake's voice sharpened with interest. "Family member? Sister-in-law's husband. Guy's been running scams for years, but tonight he finally crossed a line I can prosecute." Within an hour, Jake had positioned 3 of his best operatives around Marcus and Sarah's apartment building. One in a van across the street with long-range cameras, another in the building's lobby posing as a food delivery driver, and a third monitoring their phone communications through methods I didn't need to know about. But the surveillance was just phase 1 of my plan. Phase 2 required a little theatrical performance that would give Marcus enough rope to hang himself with. I called Sarah's phone, knowing Marcus would probably answer since she was still at work finishing her project. Sure enough, his voice came through the speaker, trying to sound casual but with an underlying tension that told me he was already nervous about his theft. "Hey Tom, Sarah's not back yet. Everything okay?" "Actually, I'm calling because I think I might have made a mistake tonight. When you were looking at my grandfather's watch, did I remember to take it back from you? I'm getting old, and Jennifer thinks I might have left it on the kitchen counter, but I could have sworn you were wearing it when you went to the bathroom." The silence stretched for almost 10 seconds. I could practically hear Marcus's mind racing, calculating his options, trying to figure out how much I suspected versus how much I actually knew. "Oh, wow, you know what? I think you might be right. I was so interested in the craftsmanship that I completely forgot I was wearing it. Let me check." More silence, probably while Marcus retrieved the watch from wherever he'd hidden it. His voice came back slightly muffled, like he was moving around the apartment. "Yeah, here it is. I'm so sorry, Tom. I got distracted talking to Jennifer and just walked out with it. That's incredibly embarrassing." Perfect. He'd just admitted to taking the watch, establishing a timeline, and providing audio evidence that Jake's team was recording from 3 different angles. "No harm done," I said, injecting just the right amount of relieved laughter into my voice. "These things happen. I'll swing by tomorrow evening to pick it up, maybe around 7. That work for you and Sarah?" "Absolutely. Again, I'm really sorry about the confusion." After I hung up, I sat back in my office chair and allowed myself a small smile. Marcus thought he'd bought himself time to figure out his next move, maybe even time to sell the watch and claim it had been lost or stolen. But what he didn't realize was that admitting to taking it had just sealed his fate. Jake called back 20 minutes later with the first surveillance report. "Your boy's in full panic mode. Our guy in the lobby watched him pace the hallway for 10 minutes after your call, talking to himself and checking his phone constantly. Then he went back into the apartment, and we heard him making calls to what sound like pawn shops, asking about selling high-end watches quickly. Any bites? 3 shops willing to look at it, but here's the interesting part. He's not asking about selling it under his own name. He's trying to set up appointments where someone else would bring it in, probably planning to use your sister-in-law as an unwitting accomplice." The pieces were falling into place exactly as I'd hoped. Marcus wasn't just a simple thief. He was a systematic con artist who specialized in manipulating the people closest to him. Sarah wasn't his first victim, and she wouldn't be his last unless someone stopped him. Phase 3 of my plan required perfect timing and a little help from someone Marcus would never see coming. I called my lawyer, David Chen, who specialized in both criminal defense and civil litigation. David had helped me navigate some complex corporate fraud cases over the years, and he understood the importance of building an airtight legal foundation before making any moves. "Tom, if this guy's been systematically defrauding your family members, we might be looking at more than just theft. Pattern fraud, identity theft, potentially even RICO violations if he's running similar schemes with other families." "That's exactly what I'm thinking. I need you to document everything we're gathering tonight. Make sure it's admissible if this goes to court." "Already on it. I'm preparing affidavits for your surveillance team and getting warrants ready in case we need to search his apartment or financial records." The beauty of Marcus's personality was that he couldn't help but escalate every situation. Instead of simply returning the watch with an apology, his greed and arrogance were driving him to double down on the theft, creating more evidence with every decision he made. Jake's second call came at midnight with news that made me laugh out loud. "Tom, you're not going to believe this. Your brother-in-law just tried to break into a jewelry store downtown. Not to steal anything, but to use their equipment to make a fake copy of your watch." "He what?" "Triggered the silent alarm at Morrison's Fine Jewelry. Our contact in the police department says Marcus told them he was trying to get in to surprise his wife with an anniversary gift. Claimed he'd arranged it with the owner earlier. Complete nonsense, of course, but it gets better." "I'm listening." "When they searched him, he had your grandfather's watch in his jacket pocket along with detailed photos he'd taken of it from every angle, plus a notebook with measurements and what looks like instructions for creating replica vintage watches." The implications hit me immediately. Marcus wasn't just stealing my family heirloom. He was planning to replace it with a fake and return the counterfeit to me, keeping the original for himself. The level of premeditation and sophistication involved elevated this from simple theft to organized fraud. But the most damaging evidence was yet to come. At 2:30 a.m., Jake called with the final piece of the puzzle. "Tom, we hit the jackpot. Marcus just called someone he thinks is a fence, a guy who specializes in moving stolen high-end goods. Turns out our contact in organized crime has been trying to build a case against this particular network for months." "Are you telling me Marcus is connected to professional thieves?" "Not just connected, he's apparently been working with them for over a year. Our fence contact says Marcus has moved jewelry, electronics, even artwork through their network. Your sister-in-law's apartment has basically been his base of operations for systematically robbing everyone they know." The scope of Marcus's criminal enterprise was staggering. This wasn't some desperate guy making a stupid mistake. This was a career criminal who'd married Sarah specifically to gain access to our family's social circle and financial resources. I thought about all the family gatherings where Marcus had carefully studied our possessions, all the casual questions about our schedules and security systems, all the times he'd volunteered to house sit when we went out of town. Every interaction had been a reconnaissance mission, every friendly conversation a data gathering operation. But Marcus had made one critical error in his criminal calculations. He'd assumed I was just another naive victim who would never see his theft coming. He'd underestimated the man whose family he was trying to rob. Tomorrow evening, when I showed up at Sarah's apartment to collect my grandfather's watch, Marcus would discover exactly how thorough my preparation had been. The police would be waiting, the FBI would have their organized crime evidence, and Sarah would finally see her husband for what he really was. But first, I had one more call to make, one more piece of the trap to set in motion. I dialed Sarah's work number, knowing she'd still be there finishing her project, completely unaware that her marriage was about to implode around her. The phone rang 4 times before Sarah's exhausted voice answered. "Tom, is everything okay? It's almost 3 in the morning." I could hear the concern in her voice, mixed with the fatigue of someone who'd been staring at spreadsheets for the past 12 hours. My heart ached for what I was about to put her through, but she deserved to know the truth about the man she'd married. "Sarah, I need you to listen carefully. Don't say anything, don't react, just listen. Marcus stole my grandfather's watch tonight, and he's not the man you think he is." Silence, then a sharp intake of breath. "What are you talking about? Marcus would never—" "He's been working with professional criminals for over a year, using your apartment as a base for stealing from our family and friends. Right now, he's sitting in a police station because he tried to break into a jewelry store to make a fake copy of my watch." I heard something crash in the background, probably Sarah dropping her coffee mug. "That's impossible. You're wrong. Marcus might have his flaws, but he's not a criminal. He's just what, Sarah? Just unemployed while claiming to work in finance? Just borrowing money from you for business ventures that don't exist? Just asking detailed questions about everyone's valuables and security systems at family gatherings?" The silence stretched longer this time. I could practically hear Sarah's world shifting on its axis as 3 years of willful blindness began to crack. "I have surveillance footage, recorded phone calls, and police reports documenting everything he's done tonight. But more importantly, I have evidence that you're not his first victim. There are other families, other women he's married and divorced after draining their bank accounts." "Stop." Sarah's voice was barely a whisper. "Just stop talking. I'm not doing this to hurt you. I'm doing this because you're my family, and family protects each other. Marcus has been systematically robbing all of us while you provided him with access and alibis." I gave her a moment to process, listening to her ragged breathing through the phone. "What do you need me to do?" she finally asked, and I could hear the tears in her voice. "I need you to come home right now, but don't let Marcus know we've talked. Act normal. Tomorrow evening, I'm coming over to get my watch back. And when I do, there are going to be some very serious people with me who want to ask Marcus about his business activities. The FBI, among others. Sarah, this goes much deeper than stealing my watch. Marcus is part of an organized network that's been operating for years. Your marriage gave him credibility and cover for crimes that could send him to federal prison." Another long pause, then Sarah's voice came back stronger, steadier. "What evidence do you have against me? Am I going to be arrested too?" It was the question I'd been dreading, but also the one that told me Sarah might actually be salvageable from this mess. "Right now, you're classified as an unwitting accomplice, but that could change depending on how you handle the next 24 hours. If you tip Marcus off, if you help him destroy evidence or flee, then you become a co-conspirator. And if I cooperate? If you cooperate, you might avoid criminal charges. But Sarah, your financial life is going to be completely destroyed. Every bank account, every credit card, every asset you've accumulated during your marriage is going to be frozen pending investigation. I heard her start to cry then, really cry, the kind of sobbing that comes when someone realizes their entire life has been built on lies. How could I have been so stupid? How could I not have seen it? Because he's a professional, Sarah. This is what he does. He studies people, finds their vulnerabilities, and exploits them. You're not the first intelligent woman to fall for this kind of manipulation, and you won't be the last. What about the wedding, the honeymoon? Was any of it real? That question cut deeper than I'd expected. I thought about Marcus's performance at their wedding last spring, how convincing his love had seemed, how genuinely happy Sarah had looked walking down that aisle. I don't know, maybe some of it was real. But Sarah, even if his feelings were genuine, his actions have been criminal from day one. Love doesn't excuse fraud. We talked for another 20 minutes, with me explaining what would happen over the next few days, and Sarah asking increasingly specific questions about the evidence against her husband. By the time we hung up, she understood that her marriage was over, and her immediate future would involve lawyers, investigators, and probably bankruptcy. But she also understood that cooperation was her only path to rebuilding her life. The next 18 hours passed like a chess match where I could see every move 3 steps ahead. Jake's surveillance team tracked Marcus as he frantically tried to contact his criminal associates, attempted to withdraw cash from multiple ATMs, and even drove to the airport to check flight prices for destinations without extradition treaties. Every desperate decision he made just added more evidence to our growing case file. David Chen spent the morning coordinating with federal prosecutors, organizing the evidence packets, and preparing the legal framework for what was about to become a major organized crime investigation. Marcus's theft of my watch had opened a door into a criminal network that had been operating across multiple states for years. By afternoon, we had enough evidence to prosecute Marcus for theft, fraud, money laundering, and conspiracy charges that could put him away for decades. But I wanted more than justice. I wanted Marcus to understand exactly how thoroughly he'd been outmaneuvered. At 6:45 p.m., I stood outside Sarah and Marcus's apartment building, my grandfather's Submariner safely locked in my home safe where it belonged. In my jacket pocket was a different watch, a nearly identical Rolex that David had borrowed from the evidence room of a previous fraud case. The plan was simple but devastating. Marcus would hand me what he thought was my grandfather's watch, not knowing it was actually a fake he'd had made by his criminal contacts. When I examined it closely, I'd discovered the deception, and that's when the real show would begin. Sarah had left work early and was waiting in the apartment, her role carefully rehearsed. She would act surprised when I discovered the fake, giving Marcus just enough rope to hang himself with before the authorities moved in. But as I walked through the lobby and stepped into the elevator, I realized something had changed. The building felt different, quieter than it should have been for a Tuesday evening. Jake's surveillance team had gone silent on their radios, and there were no lights on in Sarah and Marcus's apartment. The elevator doors opened on the 7th floor, and I immediately knew something was wrong. The hallway was too dark, too empty. None of the usual sounds of families eating dinner or watching television. I approached their apartment door and noticed it was slightly ajar, hanging open just enough to suggest someone had left in a hurry. Through the gap, I could see overturned furniture and scattered papers. Marcus was gone, but he'd left something behind that would make his capture inevitable, something that would expose the full scope of his criminal enterprise and destroy any chance he had of disappearing into a new identity. Inside that ransacked apartment was evidence of crimes that went far beyond stealing watches, evidence that would bring down an entire network of thieves and con artists who thought they were untouchable. Marcus had made his final mistake, and it was about to cost him everything. I pushed the apartment door open slowly, every instinct from my corporate security days screaming at me to call back up first. But Sarah was supposed to be in there, and if Marcus had done something to her before fleeing, every second could matter. The living room looked like a tornado had hit it. Couch cushions slashed open with stuffing scattered everywhere. Picture frames smashed on the hardwood floor. Sarah's jewelry box dumped out, its contents spread across the coffee table like someone had been frantically searching for something specific. But it wasn't random destruction. This was methodical, professional. Someone had been looking for evidence, trying to eliminate any traces of their criminal operation before disappearing. The question was whether that someone was Marcus or his associates cleaning up loose ends. "Sarah?" I called out, my voice echoing in the unnatural silence. No response. I moved through the apartment systematically, checking each room. The bedroom was in similar chaos, with clothes pulled from drawers and papers scattered across the floor. But in the home office, I found what Marcus had been desperately trying to destroy before his escape. A fireproof safe, standing open and completely empty except for a single piece of paper. I picked it up carefully, recognizing it immediately as a page from Marcus's notebook, the same one the police had found when he was caught at the jewelry store. But this page wasn't about my grandfather's watch. This page contained names, addresses, and detailed financial information for at least 20 families. Our neighbors, Sarah's co-workers, people from their church, even some of Jennifer's book club friends. Each entry included notes about valuable possessions, daily schedules, and security vulnerabilities. Marcus hadn't just been targeting our family. He'd been systematically cataloging potential victims throughout our entire social network, building a database of opportunities that his criminal associates could exploit for months or even years. My phone buzzed with a text from Jake. "Package delivered. Check your email." I opened my laptop and found a video file that made my blood run cold. Security footage from the apartment building's parking garage, time-stamped just 40 minutes ago, showing Marcus loading Sarah into the trunk of a black sedan while she appeared to be unconscious. This wasn't just theft anymore. This was kidnapping. I called Jake immediately, my hands shaking as I tried to process what I'd just witnessed. "Tom, we've got a problem. Marcus figured out we were watching him, and he's gone completely off script. Our surveillance team lost him about an hour ago when he switched vehicles in a downtown parking structure." "Jake, he's got Sarah. I just watched him put her in a car trunk. We need to call the FBI now." "Already done. Agent Patricia Coleman is en route to your location. She's been tracking this criminal network for 2 years, and Marcus just became their #1 priority." While I waited for federal agents to arrive, I continued searching the apartment, trying to piece together Marcus's escape plan. In the kitchen trash, I found shredded documents that looked like travel itineraries. In the bathroom medicine cabinet, I discovered fake identification cards with Marcus's photo but different names. But the most chilling discovery was in Sarah's purse, abandoned on the kitchen counter. Her phone was still there, but someone had sent text messages from it within the past hour. Messages to her boss saying she was taking emergency family leave. Messages to her friends canceling plans for the rest of the week. Messages designed to buy Marcus time before anyone realized she was missing. Agent Coleman arrived 23 minutes later with a team of federal investigators who transformed the chaotic apartment into a crime scene worthy of a television show. They photographed everything, bagged evidence, and set up communication equipment that looked like it belonged in a spy movie. Coleman was exactly what you'd expect from a federal agent who specialized in organized crime. Mid-40s, sharp eyes that missed nothing, and the kind of quiet authority that made everyone in the room pay attention when she spoke. "Mr. Harrison, I need you to understand that your brother-in-law isn't just a petty thief who got in over his head. Marcus Reynolds, which probably isn't his real name, is part of a sophisticated criminal organization that operates across multiple states." She pulled out a tablet and showed me surveillance photos of Marcus meeting with known criminals, financial records showing money laundering operations, and evidence of at least 6 other families who'd been systematically robbed after Marcus gained their trust through marriage or friendship. The watch theft was actually the smallest part of his operation. Over the past 3 years, his network has stolen approximately $2.3 million in cash, jewelry, artwork, and other valuables. Your sister-in-law provided him with social access to dozens of potential victims. "What about Sarah? Is she a victim or an accomplice?" Coleman's expression softened slightly. "Based on our investigation, she appears to be another victim. But Tom, I need you to prepare yourself for the possibility that we might not find her alive." The words hit me like a physical blow. I'd been so focused on exposing Marcus's crimes and protecting my family that I hadn't fully considered the danger Sarah was in. These weren't just thieves, they were career criminals who'd kidnapped someone who could identify them and testify against their entire operation. What can I do to help find her? "Tell me everything about tonight. Every detail of your plan, every conversation you had, every step you took to gather evidence against Marcus." For the next 2 hours, I walked Coleman and her team through my entire investigation. They were particularly interested in the surveillance footage Jake had gathered and the recorded phone conversations where Marcus admitted to taking my watch. But it was the notebook page I'd found in the safe that really got their attention. This is a target list for their next phase of operations, Coleman explained, studying the names and addresses Marcus had compiled. If we hadn't interrupted him tonight, dozens more families would have been victimized over the next few months. She looked up at me with something that might have been respect. Your investigation probably prevented millions of dollars in additional thefts and saved a lot of people from going through what your family experienced. That should have felt good, but all I could think about was Sarah locked in a car trunk somewhere, paying the price for my decision to expose her husband's crimes. Agent Coleman's phone rang, and she stepped away to take the call. When she returned, her expression had changed completely. "Tom, we just got a break. Marcus's vehicle was spotted on traffic cameras heading north on Interstate 90. He's driving toward Coeur d'Alene, probably trying to reach a safe house his organization maintains near the Idaho border." "How long ago?" 47 minutes, but here's the good news, if we can call it that. Sarah's phone is still pinging cell towers, which means she's alive and Marcus hasn't disposed of it yet. The federal response to a kidnapping investigation was like watching a military operation unfold in real time. Within minutes, Agent Coleman had coordinated with Idaho State Police, activated air surveillance units, and deployed tactical teams to intercept points along Marcus's likely escape routes. But what happened next would determine whether Sarah came home alive or became another casualty of the criminal network her husband had been secretly serving. My phone rang, and Marcus's name appeared on the screen. Agent Coleman motioned for me to answer while her technical team activated recording equipment. "Tom, I think we need to have a conversation." Marcus's voice was different now, stripped of its usual charm and fake friendliness. This was the real Marcus, cold and calculating. "Where's Sarah, you son of a bitch?" "Sarah's fine for now, but her continued health depends on how reasonable you're willing to be about this situation." Coleman was frantically writing notes, probably trying to trace the call while keeping Marcus on the line as long as possible. "What do you want, Marcus?" "I want you to call off your federal friends. I know you've been working with law enforcement, probably since before I even took your precious watch. Very clever, Tom. Very well planned. But now you're going to help me disappear, or Sarah pays the price for your detective work." The audacity was breathtaking. Even facing federal charges and a kidnapping investigation, Marcus still thought he could manipulate his way out of consequences. "You're insane if you think I'm going to help you escape. Release Sarah and turn yourself in. It's your only chance to avoid spending the rest of your life in federal prison." Marcus laughed, but there was no humor in it. "Tom, you really don't understand who you're dealing with, do you? This organization has been operating for over a decade. We have resources, connections, and methods for dealing with problems like you and your sister-in-law. Then why are you running scared instead of using those resources?" The silence stretched for almost 10 seconds. When Marcus spoke again, his voice carried a note of desperation that told me everything I needed to know about his situation. "You destroyed 3 years of careful planning in a single night. Do you have any idea how much money you cost us? How many operations you compromised with your amateur surveillance games?" Agent Coleman was nodding approvingly, making encouraging gestures for me to keep him talking. "I cost you exactly what you deserve to lose, Marcus. You're a parasite who preys on people who trusted you. Sarah loved you, and you turned her into an unwitting accomplice to your crimes. Sarah was useful, just like you were useful when you provided me with access to your family's social circle. But usefulness has limits, Tom, and both of you have reached yours." The threat was clear, but something in Marcus's tone suggested he was stalling for time just as much as we were. Maybe his criminal associates had abandoned him when the federal investigation started. Maybe he was truly alone with a kidnapped woman and no real escape plan. "Marcus, listen to me carefully. Release Sarah unharmed, and I'll testify that she was completely innocent in your schemes. Keep her, and I'll make sure she's classified as a co-conspirator who deserves whatever happens to accomplices in federal kidnapping cases." "You're bluffing." "Am I? Sarah's been living off stolen money for 3 years. She's been providing you with alibis and access to victims. A good prosecutor could paint her as your partner rather than your victim." I watched Agent Coleman's eyebrows rise. She obviously hadn't expected me to take such a harsh negotiating position with my own sister-in-law, but sometimes you had to be cruel to be kind. What's it going to be, Marcus? Release her and face your charges alone, or drag her down with you and add 20 years to your sentence for kidnapping? The line went dead. Agent Coleman immediately started barking orders into her radio, coordinating with tracking teams to triangulate Marcus's last known position. But I was thinking about something else entirely, something that might give us the advantage we needed to bring Sarah home safely. Marcus had made one final mistake in his criminal career, and it was about to cost him everything he'd worked to build. You see, while Marcus thought he was holding all the cards by kidnapping Sarah, he'd actually just given us the perfect opportunity to destroy his entire criminal network once and for all. Because Marcus had Sarah's phone, every call he made, every text he sent, every GPS ping was being tracked by federal surveillance systems he didn't even know existed. What he thought was his lifeline to negotiating freedom was actually a digital leash that would lead us straight to him. Agent Coleman's team had been monitoring Sarah's phone data for the past hour, building a precise map of Marcus's movements. They knew he'd stopped at 2 different locations before heading toward Idaho, and more importantly, they knew exactly where he was right now. And he's at the old Riverside truck stop, about 15 miles outside Spokane, Coleman announced, studying real-time satellite imagery on her tablet. Vehicle's been stationary for 12 minutes, which suggests he's either refueling or meeting someone. The truck stop was perfect for our purposes. Multiple access roads, limited escape routes, and enough open space for tactical teams to position themselves without being detected. If Marcus was planning to hand Sarah off to his criminal associates, we'd catch them all in one coordinated sweep. But as we raced toward the location in a convoy of federal vehicles, my phone rang again. This time, it wasn't Marcus calling. It was Sarah. "Tom?" Her voice was weak, shaky, but definitely alive. "Tom, can you hear me?" "Sarah, thank God. Are you hurt? Where are you?" "I'm in some kind of storage building. It smells like motor oil, and there are truck parts everywhere. Marcus left me here with 2 other men, and they're talking about moving me somewhere else." Agent Coleman was frantically signaling her team, adjusting their approach based on this new intelligence. If Sarah was in a storage facility rather than Marcus's car, it meant we were dealing with a more complex operation than we'd realized. "Sarah, listen carefully. Can you describe the men you're with? Can you hear any identifying sounds like highway traffic or machinery?" "One of them has a scar across his left cheek, maybe 40 years old. The other one is younger, has tattoos covering both arms. They keep checking their phones and arguing about something called the shipment." Coleman's expression darkened as Sarah provided those descriptions. She was already pulling up mugshots on her tablet, comparing faces to Sarah's details. "Tom, they're planning to put me in a truck with other people. I heard them say something about crossing state lines tonight with a full load." The implications hit everyone in our vehicle simultaneously. This wasn't just about Marcus stealing my watch or even his systematic fraud operation. We'd stumbled into something much bigger, much more dangerous. "Sarah, I need you to stay on the line, but don't let them know you're talking to anyone. Can you do that?" "I think so. They're in the next room arguing about money. Something about how Marcus screwed up their timeline and now everyone's at risk." Agent Coleman was speaking rapidly into her radio, calling for additional backup units and coordinating with what sounded like a multi-agency task force. The truck stop that had seemed like a simple arrest location was now being treated as a major criminal hub. Through the phone, I could hear Sarah moving carefully, trying to gather more information without alerting her captors. "Tom, there are other women here. At least 4 that I can see, maybe more. They look scared and some of them don't speak English. I think this might be human trafficking." My blood went cold. Marcus's theft of my grandfather's watch had led us into the middle of a human trafficking operation that was apparently using legitimate truck stops as transfer points for their victims. "Agent Coleman," I said, covering my phone's microphone, "we're not just dealing with property crimes anymore." She nodded grimly. "Tom, tell Sarah to find a place to hide if possible, but don't do anything that might put her in more danger. We're less than 5 minutes out." But as we approached the truck stop, it became clear that Marcus's criminal associates had been preparing for exactly this kind of federal response. The parking lot was nearly empty except for a few legitimate truckers, and there was no sign of the black sedan Marcus had been driving. "He moved her again," Coleman said, studying the GPS data from Sarah's phone. "Signals coming from about 2 miles east, probably another facility in their network." Sarah's voice came through my phone again, more urgent now. Tom, they're loading everyone into trucks. I can hear engines starting. I think they're about to move us. Sarah, can you see any license plates? Any identifying marks on the vehicles? There's a truck with Oregon plates and another one that says Pacific Northwest Logistics on the side. But Tom, I'm scared. These men aren't just criminals. They're talking about people like we're merchandise. Agent Coleman was already radiating the new information to air surveillance units, trying to track the vehicles before they could disperse onto different highways. But the scope of the operation was becoming overwhelming. Sarah, listen to me. Federal agents are coordinating a rescue operation right now. Just stay hidden and stay alive. We're going to find you. I love you, Tom. Tell Jennifer I'm sorry for bringing this into our family. The line went dead, but not because Sarah had hung up. The phone signal had been cut, probably deliberately, which meant Marcus's associates had discovered her communication and were taking countermeasures. For the next 3 hours, Agent Coleman's team coordinated one of the most complex rescue operations I'd ever witnessed. Multiple agencies, dozens of vehicles, air support, and real-time intelligence analysis that looked like something from a Hollywood thriller. But it was a single piece of evidence from Marcus's abandoned notebook that finally broke the case wide open. Remember that page I'd found in his safe, the one with names and addresses of potential victims? Agent Coleman's forensics team had found fingerprints on that paper that matched someone in the FBI's organized crime database. Vincent Kozlov, a Russian national who'd been running human trafficking operations along the West Coast for over 6 years. The same Vincent Kozlov who owned Pacific Northwest Logistics, the trucking company Sarah had seen. Tom, your brother-in-law wasn't just stealing watches and jewelry. He was recruiting victims for an international trafficking network. Every family he targeted, every woman he charmed, was being evaluated for potential abduction. The revelation was staggering. Sarah hadn't just married a petty criminal. She'd been living with someone who was essentially shopping for human beings to sell to the highest bidder. How many others were there? How many women like Sarah? Coleman pulled out a thick file folder. Based on what we've uncovered tonight, at least 12 women have disappeared after coming into contact with Marcus over the past 3 years. Women who trusted him, who brought him into their social circles, who gave him access to their families and friends. I thought about all the family gatherings where Marcus had been so charming, so interested in meeting new people, so good at making connections with women who were lonely or vulnerable. Every conversation had been a screening interview for potential kidnapping victims. But Sarah's phone call had given us something Marcus's network didn't expect. Real-time intelligence about their operation, including vehicle descriptions, personnel details, and location information that would allow federal agents to dismantle the entire trafficking ring. At 2:17 a.m., Agent Coleman's radio crackled with the news we'd been waiting for. All units, we have visual confirmation on the target vehicles. Pacific Northwest Logistics truck convoy spotted on Highway 95 northbound, approximately 30 miles from the Canadian border. The final phase of the rescue operation was about to begin, and Marcus was about to discover that stealing my grandfather's watch had been the biggest mistake of his criminal career. Because what started as a simple theft had exposed an entire human trafficking network, and every person involved was going to pay the price for underestimating a family that fought back. The coordinated takedown happened just before dawn, and it was more intense than anything I'd seen outside of action movies. 3 truck convoys, dozens of federal agents, and enough evidence to prosecute what Agent Coleman called the largest human trafficking operation we've encountered in the Pacific Northwest. Marcus was found in the lead truck, still wearing a fake Rolex he'd probably planned to sell once he reached Canada. The irony wasn't lost on anyone that his obsession with my grandfather's watch had ultimately led to his capture and the rescue of 17 women who'd been destined for international trafficking markets. Sarah was physically unharmed, but emotionally shattered by the realization of what her marriage had really been. She'd spent 3 years unknowingly providing cover for a man who specialized in identifying and abducting women like herself. The legal aftermath took months to resolve. Marcus pleaded guilty to federal trafficking charges in exchange for information about the larger criminal network. He received a 47-year sentence without possibility of parole, which meant he'd never again have the opportunity to charm his way into someone's family for criminal purposes. Vincent Kozlov and 8 other members of the trafficking ring received similar sentences, effectively dismantling an operation that had been destroying lives across multiple states for years. But the most satisfying moment came 6 months later, when Agent Coleman called to tell me about Marcus's final attempt at manipulation. "Tom, you're not going to believe this. Marcus tried to plea bargain for a reduced sentence by claiming he was actually an undercover informant trying to expose the trafficking network from within." Did anyone believe that nonsense? His own lawyer laughed in his face. Apparently, Marcus thought he could convince a federal judge that stealing your watch was part of some elaborate sting operation he was running. The audacity was so perfectly Marcus that I almost felt sorry for him. Almost. As for my grandfather's submariner, it's back on my wrist where it belongs, though it means something different to me now. Every time I look at it, I remember that sometimes standing up to thieves and predators can save more lives than just your own. Sarah eventually moved across the country to start fresh, but not before thanking me for refusing to let Marcus's crimes go unpunished. She understood that my investigation had probably saved her life, even though it had destroyed everything she thought she knew about her marriage. The watch still keeps perfect time, just like it did for my grandfather and my father before me. But now it carries an additional story, a reminder that family heirlooms are worth protecting not just for their monetary value, but for the principles they represent. Sometimes the most dangerous thieves are the ones who steal your trust along with your possessions, and sometimes the best revenge is simply refusing to be a victim. Marcus thought he was clever enough to outsmart everyone around him, thought he could take whatever he wanted without consequences. He learned the hard way that some families fight back, and when they do, the results can be more devastating than any criminal ever imagined. The last time I heard about Marcus, he was serving his sentence in a federal penitentiary in Colorado, probably still wondering how a simple watch theft had cost him his freedom and destroyed an entire criminal empire. But that's what happens when you underestimate the man whose family you're trying to destroy. That's what happens when you mistake kindness for weakness. And that's what happens when you steal from someone who understands that justice isn't just about punishment, it's about protecting everyone else from becoming your next victim. My grandfather would have been proud of how his watch helped bring down a criminal network. Sometimes the most valuable things we inherit aren't made of gold and steel. They're made of principles and the courage to defend them when it matters most. If you like this story, please like this video, subscribe to the channel, and share your impressions of this story in the comments. The truth is, we never know what evil might be hiding behind a familiar face, what criminal enterprises might be operating right under our noses, disguised as ordinary family relationships. Marcus's case taught me that predators don't always look like monsters. Sometimes they look like charming sons-in-law who remember your birthday and compliment your cooking. Sometimes they drive nice cars and wear expensive suits and know exactly what to say to make you trust them completely. But there are always signs if you know how to look for them, the way they study your possessions a little too carefully, the questions that seem innocent but probe for information about your security systems and daily routines, the gradual way they position themselves at the center of your family's social circle, always volunteering to help, always eager to meet new people, always collecting data for purposes you can't imagine. Sarah recovered, eventually. It took years of therapy and a complete change of identity, but she rebuilt her life far away from the wreckage Marcus had created. She sends Jennifer Christmas cards now, signed with her new married name, letting us know she found someone who actually deserves her trust. As for the 17 women who were rescued that night, their stories ended differently. Some went home to families who'd been searching for them for years. Others had been gone so long that rebuilding their lives required starting completely over. But they were alive and they were free, and that's what mattered most. The criminal network Marcus belonged to was larger than anyone had initially realized. His arrest led to investigations in 12 states and ultimately resulted in over 60 convictions for trafficking, fraud, and organized racketeering. Families across the country discovered that people they'd trusted had been systematically cataloging their vulnerabilities for criminal exploitation. Sometimes I wonder how different things might have been if I'd simply reported the stolen watch to local police instead of setting up my own investigation. Would Sarah have remained married to her trafficker husband, unknowingly providing cover for his crimes indefinitely? Would those 17 women have disappeared into international slavery markets? would dozens more families have been victimized before anyone connected the dots? The ripple effects of that single decision to fight back instead of accepting victimization probably saved hundreds of lives and prevented millions of dollars in losses. All because I refused to let someone steal my grandfather's watch without consequences. That's the real lesson here. Evil thrives when good people decide it's easier to look the other way than to confront uncomfortable truths. Marcus counted on everyone being too polite, too trusting, too afraid of family drama to investigate his suspicious behavior. He built his entire criminal career on the assumption that victims would suffer in silence rather than risk social awkwardness. But sometimes, one person willing to ask hard questions and demand real answers can expose an entire web of deception that's been operating in plain sight for years. My grandfather's submariner still sits on my wrist every day, keeping perfect time just like it has for over 50 years. But now it carries the weight of a story that goes far beyond 3 generations of honest workmanship and family pride. It's a reminder that the things we value most aren't just objects to be protected, they're symbols of the principles we're willing to defend. And sometimes, defending those principles means standing up to people who think they can take whatever they want from whoever they want without ever facing consequences. Marcus learned the hard way that some families fight back when threatened. He discovered that some people refuse to be victims, no matter how charming or convincing their predators might be. The next time someone you barely know starts asking too many questions about your valuables, your schedule, or your security systems, remember Marcus. Remember that criminals don't always look like criminals. Sometimes they look exactly like people you're supposed to trust. And if someone ever tries to steal something precious from you, remember that how you respond might determine whether you're their last victim or just their first mistake. Thank you for listening to this story. Stay vigilant, protect your family, and never underestimate the power of refusing to accept injustice, no matter how small it might seem at first.